Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Gregorian. I'm the president and CEO of the Detroit Economic Club, and I want to welcome you to today's meeting. I especially want to welcome our DEC members. If you're not a DEC member yet, please allow me 10 seconds to myth bust. There's no application process, no nomination process, or job level requirement for becoming a DEC member. We're simply looking for people that want to build their networks with other DEC members and learn from thought leaders like the one we have today on stage. And you can sign up when you get back to your office at econclub.org. As we get started, I would just ask you to take a moment to silence your cell phone so we do not disturb today's program. And certainly one of the many traditions at DEC meetings is we always begin by honoring our country with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I would just ask you to stand and join me. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And kindly remain standing as our invocation today will be delivered by Deacon Joseph Adams from Hartford Memorial Baptist Church.
Let's pray. Almighty God, we ask your blessings upon this meeting today. We ask your guidance in resolving the problems that is facing this nation. In resolving our problems, we must talk to each other, communicate with one another honestly, and let each other know what we think. That might not always be good. Reduce the divide between our nation, in our nation. Help us to know the prejudice and the racial divides have been with us before the time of Jesus. These divides have destroyed many nations. The same divides are beginning to weaken our democratic way of life by using our political system against us. Historians have come up with and identified a solution for our divides. It's love and respect for one another and our fellow man. We have another force or a way that comes to us, and it's because of love and respect. It's called the rule of law. The rule of law has preserved and protected our democratic nation since its existence. We must continue to protect and strengthen the rule of law, starting in our homes, teaching our children that all men are created equal. We ask these blessings from you who have created us all. Amen.
Thank you, Deacon Adams. A quick but important thank you to Detroit Public Television and Lawrence Technological University for partnering with us on today's webcast. And we certainly love having former CEO of the Detroit Economic Club, Beth Chappell, with us today. Beth, say hello to everybody. And you all know we love having high school and college students with us at each meeting. These students are here courtesy of our generous corporate sponsors. Today was no exception. They got a private Q&A session with Administrator Wheeler. I want to just take a quick moment to recognize those students and sponsor and ask you to hold your applause. Today, we're thrilled to have Detroit Collegiate Prep with us. Compliments of Jim Anderson in Urban Science. Thank you, Jim. Advanced Tech Academy, thanks to Lori and the Rush Group. Melvindale High School Cardinals, thanks to Ford Motor Company. And Madison High School, thank you, Matt Rubinski and KeyBank. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause, thanking our sponsors and welcoming students. A couple things on your tables quickly. Our sponsor brochure, please take a look at the brochure. Patronize those businesses. They are the reason that we can deliver programs like today, so we thank you if you're part of those sponsors. If you're not, would love to learn about the opportunities, love to talk with you offline. Also on your table is our season lineup. Hope you can be with us. Healthcare certainly is on everybody's mind, and on November 13th, we're lucky we're going to be hosting the president of Express Scripts. And November 19th, Shad Khan, CEO of FlexEngate, who also owns the Jacksonville Jaguars will be with us. And as always, watch for more meetings as we're able to add them. If you are a tweeter, we want you to tweet today using @DebtEconomicClub. And the DEC has an incredible history of speakers that we love to share. Administrator Wheeler, October 22nd, is a popular date in DEC's 85-year history. You, sir, now join a distinguished list of 14 other speakers who have graced our podium on this day. Of particular note, 1965, we hosted the Honorable Hubert H. Humphrey, who was Vice President of the United States. Today, we're pleased to add you, Administrator Wheeler, as our 15th speaker on this day in DEC history. So congratulations and thank you for being with us. And one of the more popular elements, certainly, of DEC meetings is the final 15 minutes. We want to hear from you. So there's instructions on your tables how to submit questions via your smartphone. And those questions will make their way to a gentleman I'm about to put to work. Jim Anderson is founder, president, and CEO of Urban Science. He's a board member and a great friend to the Detroit Economic Club, and also a huge supporter of many, many things in our community. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jim Anderson.
Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, DEC members and guests. It is my privilege to introduce today's guest speaker. On February 28, 2019, the U.S. Senate confirmed Andrew Wheeler as the 15th administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Wheeler has dedicated his career to advancing sound environmental policies. He began his career during the George H.W. Bush administration as a special assistant in EPA's Pollution Prevention and Toxics Office. He was a principal and a team leader of the Energy and Environment Practice Group at Faegre BD Consulting, as well as counsel at Faegre Baker Daniels Law Firm, where he practiced since 2009. Prior to his work with the firm, Mr. Wheeler served for 6 years as the Majority Staff Director and Chief Counsel, as well as the Minority Staff Director of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. Mr. Wheeler is the past chairman of the National Energy Resource Organization and a Stennis Fellow. Mr. Wheeler is also an Eagle Scout. Mr. Wheeler hails from Fairfield, Ohio. He completed his law degree at Washington University in St. Louis, his MBA at George Mason University, and his undergraduate work at Case Western Reserve University in English and biology. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm Detroit Economic Club welcome for the Honorable Andrew Wheeler.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And thank you, Jim, for the introduction. I want to thank the Detroit Economic Club for inviting me. Thank you very much. When President Trump called me and asked me to take the lead at EPA, he asked me to do three things. He said to continue to clean up the air, continue to clean up the water, and continue to deregulate to help create more jobs and keep the economy growing. The president knows that we can do all three at the same time, and I know that we can too. And here's the evidence. From 1970 to 2018, the combined emissions of the 6 main criteria air pollutants dropped 74%, while the U.S. economy grew by 275%. Emissions of all 6 of the air pollutants have continued to decline under President Trump. Today, we have the cleanest air on record, and we are ranked #1 in the world for access to clean drinking water. My frustration with some of the media is that they don't tell this side of the story. If you had similar reductions in opioid addiction or gang violence, for example, it would lead the nightly news. We've made tremendous environmental progress as a nation, and the public needs to know that. And as we continue to reduce pollution, we're also reducing burdensome regulations. Under President Trump, the EPA has finalized 46 deregulatory actions, saving Americans more than $3.7 billion in regulatory costs. And we have an additional 45 actions in development that we are projected to save billions more. And a recent report found that we were the top agency in fulfilling President Trump's 2-for-1 executive order. During the first 2 years, we cut 26 regulations and created just 4 new ones. I'm often asked, how can you deregulate and protect the environment at the same time? This question assumes that regulation is the only path to environmental protection. Yet we know that innovation and technology have led to remarkable environmental progress. And often deregulation is necessary to spur on that innovation. Furthermore, deregulation does not always mean rolling back rules. More often than not, it means modernizing or simplifying or streamlining regulations. And that is what creates greater regulatory certainty. And greater certainty gives the American public the ability to do what they do best: innovate, create, and produce cleaner and safer technologies. And nowhere in the country is that more true than here in Detroit. Today, I'd like to highlight several examples of our regulatory approach, beginning with a deregulatory example that hits right home for the state of Michigan, our nation's fuel economy standards. During a visit to Detroit, President Trump promised the American public that his administration would address and fix the current fuel economy standards. EPA and the Department of Transportation are delivering on his commitment, and we're doing it in 2 stages. First, we're establishing one set of national fuel economy standards by revoking California's waiver. Then we are proposing revisions to the nation's corporate average fuel economy, or CAFE standards. Our goal from the beginning was a 50-state solution. I met with Mary Nichols, the head of the California Air Resources Board, at least 3 times prior to our proposal last year. But despite our best efforts, we could not reach a solution. We embrace federalism and the role of the states, but federalism does not mean that one state can dictate standards for the entire country. To borrow from Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry, CAFE does not stand for California Assumes Federal Empowerment. So we are now moving forward with one national fuel economy standard. We believe the law is clear. No state has the authority to opt out of the national fuel economy standards, and no state has the authority to set its own fuel economy standards that impact human safety, the environment, and commerce for the rest of the country. Under the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, or EPCA, the Department of Transportation sets CAFE standards. EPCA expressly provides that the federal government regulates fuel economy, not the states. Separate and apart from that, EPA is withdrawing the waiver based on one of the criteria for denying a waiver. Does the state need its standards to meet, quote, compelling and extraordinary conditions? Understood in its original context, the California Waiver Authority exists because California has uniquely bad problems with smog-forming pollutants. There's a direct link between California cars and their emissions of criteria pollutants and the impacts they have on California due to the state's extraordinarily perfect storm of features like population, traffic, ocean currents, and topography. But for greenhouse gases, the tight and direct link isn't there. California cars have no closer link to California climate impacts than do cars on the road in Japan, because climate is a global issue, not a state-specific issue. It makes sense that Congress carved out waiver authority for California to address its unique local problems. It does not make sense to use that authority to try to address global issues like greenhouse gas emissions. It's time to put California waiver back in its box. But let me be clear, our action does not impact a number of other California programs, including its low-emission vehicle program, designed to address harmful ozone and other forms of air pollution. A lot of people are confusing air pollution standards with greenhouse gas standards. CO2 is not a pollutant under the criteria air program of the Clean Air Act. We are not taking away California's ability to address the criteria air pollutants. They can still set separate standards for those. In fact, we hope the state will focus more of its time on the criteria air pollution. California actually has the worst air quality in the United States. It has 82 areas that are not in attainment with federal air quality standards. And 34 million people live in those non-attainment areas in California. That's more than twice as many people as any other state in the country. We hope that the state will focus on these issues rather than trying to set fuel economy standards for the nation. Establishing one national standard clears the way for our final revisions to the nation's fuel economy standards, also known as the Safe Vehicles Rule. Our proposed rule reflects what we believe is the right approach to national fuel economy standards, right for public safety and the environment, and I'll give you 4 reasons why. First, revising the standards will reduce the price of new vehicles. The average sticker price of a new vehicle reached $39,500 in the first half of this year, and this is simply out of reach for many American families. The current trajectory of the standards is one of the factors driving costs higher. In order to comply with the Obama standards, automakers need to sell many more electric vehicles. By some counts, they will need to produce lineups that are 50% electric or more over the next 7 years in order to meet the Obama standards. However, electric cars cost roughly $12,000 more to make than the average vehicle, and those costs are passed on to consumers, which is one reason why electric vehicles are still, despite millions of dollars in subsidies, less than 2% of new vehicle sales. But one way for automakers to meet the standards is to lower the price of electric vehicles and raise the price of other more popular vehicles such as SUVs and trucks. In other words, American families are paying more for SUVs and trucks so automakers can sell EVs at a cheaper price. It's one thing for the American public to directly subsidize electric vehicles through tax incentives. It's another thing to use the nation's vehicle emission standards to prop up a product that has minimal impacts on the environment and only the wealthy can afford. Of the roughly 57,000 households that received the EV tax credit in 2016, nearly 80% made over $100,000 a year. If those people want to buy an EV, I think they can afford one without asking low and middle income Americans to help pay for it. Compared to keeping the 2012 standards in place, our proposal would reduce the price of new vehicles by thousands of dollars, which leads me directly to my second point. Revising the standards and reducing the price of new vehicles will save lives. Research shows that passengers are more likely to be killed in older vehicles compared to newer ones. By reducing the price of new vehicles, we will help more Americans purchase newer and safer cars and trucks. We estimate that our proposed revised standards and the SAFE rule could save thousands of lives. Third, we are revising the standards in a manner that will have a negligible impact on the environment compared to the current standards. Here are 2 important facts that the public needs to know. First, even the most stringent vehicle standards imaginable will have only a minimal impact on global temperatures. According to the Obama EPA's 2012 analysis, this was their analysis, even a much more stringent version of their rule than the one that they eventually finalized would have only lowered global temperatures by 2/100ths of a degree Celsius by 2100. It's important to put things in context when we're talking about changes in hundredths of a degree Celsius in 2100. Here's the second fact. Most automakers cannot comply with the trajectory of the current standards. In model year 2017, only 3 large manufacturers complied based on the technology levels of their vehicles alone. Most large manufacturers used banked credits along with technology improvements to maintain compliance, or they paid fees. This begs the question, why keep standards that automakers can only comply with through credits and fees? We believe that changes are needed. And because our rule would remove certain credits and fees, our standards would have a negligible impact on the environment compared to the current standards. There would be fewer off-ramps, so you'd have more cars in compliance with the new standards. Fourth and finally, revising the standards will help more Americans purchase newer, cleaner, and safer cars. The average age of vehicles on the road today is at a record high of 12 years. In 1990, the average age was 8 years. This lack of fleet turnover creates a host of problems, most important of which is passenger safety. By revising the standards, we will reduce the price of new vehicles, and as prices fall, more Americans will be able to purchase newer, cleaner, and safer vehicles that they want to buy. The President knows that accelerating fleet turnover is good for the auto industry, it's good for consumers, it's good for public safety, and it's good for the environment. The next regulatory example deals with the other side of the coin, strengthening existing regulations. And once again, this involves an issue that is unfortunately well known in Michigan, lead in drinking water. 2 weeks ago, EPA announced its proposal for the most significant overhaul of the lead and copper rule since 1991. The water sector has known for years that the federal regulations protecting our drinking water from lead and copper needs to be updated and improved. Prior administrations failed to get it done, but we're on top of it. We made a commitment early on that we will get it done, and we are delivering on our word. The country knows a lot more now than we did in the 90s about the impact of lead in drinking water, especially on children. Therefore, our proposal builds on modern science and takes a proactive and holistic approach from testing to treatment to replacing lead service lines to communicating clearly with the public. When I was first briefed by staff early in the rulemaking process last year, I told them that we must ensure that the last mile of lead service lines replaced is not in communities that are most at risk. My fear was that we would end up replacing pipes in the more affluent neighborhoods and allow the lower income neighborhoods to linger for years. It's estimated to take 20 to 30 years to replace all of the lead surface lines in the United States. Those communities cannot afford to wait. That is why our proposal includes a suite of new actions to identify and address the most impacted areas. And here are some of the major changes between the current regulations issued in 1991 and our proposal. First, for the first time, we would require public lead surface line inventories. Currently, systems are only required to collect an inventory for the purpose of identifying enough sites for tap sampling. These inventories are not of the entire system, nor are they public. Under our proposal, if a system has lead service lines, all required samples will be taken at those homes versus only half the samples under the current rule. And systems would also have to pay attention to individual locations with elevated levels of lead by identifying the cause and fixing the problem. Number two, we are strengthening requirements for replacing lead surface lines. We are proposing a new trigger designed to compel water systems to take proactive actions to plan upgrades to aging infrastructure and reduce levels of lead in drinking water. Systems above the new trigger of 10 parts per billion would be required to work with their state to set an annual goal for replacing lead surface lines. Service lines above our existing action level of 15 parts per billion would be required to fully replace a minimum of 3% of the number of known or potential lead surface lines annually. There's already been some misinformation in the press about the 3% number. The current number is 7%, but the current number is riddled with loopholes, such as counting partial replacements and other off-ramps that don't require a full 7% reduction or replacement. Our 3% number will close the loopholes, and it would result in more actual lead surface lines than the current regulation. Our proposal also prohibits test outs to avoid replacing lead surface lines, an allowed practice under the current rule that has significantly slowed progress and resulted in much less than 3% being replaced. These are dramatic improvements from the status quo. Finally, we are strengthening the protections for children in schools. For the first time ever, systems will be required to test school and child care facilities, and the results must be provided, as well as information on actions the school or child care facility can take to reduce lead in drinking water. Community water systems are not currently required to test schools and child care facilities, and the information from those tests will be made publicly available so that the parents of all the children can see what the lead levels are in the water in the schools and the daycare centers that their children are in. In addition, the current regulation does not require water companies to notify their customers of a lead problem for 30 days. We've shortened that down to 24 hours. I think it's important that if you have lead in your drinking water, you know within 24 hours that you're in violation of the water, so you can find other routes to safe drinking water instead of waiting 30 days to be notified. Our proposal is a major milestone in the 49-year history of the agency. On the campaign trail, President Trump said he wants to make sure that there would never be another crisis like Flint. That has been a guiding principle for us. Part of the problem in Flint was a serious failure of communication by state and local officials as well as the EPA. This is one of the reasons our proposal will require systems to notify their customers within 24 hours if lead is found in their water. As I said, currently they have to wait 30 days. I believe that these two examples, the cafe and the lead, clearly demonstrate that excessive federal regulations are not necessary to drive environmental progress. At one end of the spectrum, we are strengthening public health protections in areas where the agency has failed to uphold its core obligations, and we are doing it in a manner that respects the role of the states and does not jeopardize economic growth. For instance, one of our most important regulatory actions next year will be to update the standards for nitrogen oxide emissions from heavy-duty trucks. Since 2000, NOx emissions in the U.S. have fallen by 52%. However, it is estimated that heavy-duty trucks will be responsible for 1/3 of NOx emissions from the transportation sector by 2025. And it's already been 20 years since EPA last set NOx emission standards for the heavy-duty trucks. By working closely with states and the private sector, we will reduce NOx emissions. This is not required by statute or court order, but it makes sense to do, and it will help more areas, particularly urban areas, reach attainment of the federal air quality standards. At the other end of the spectrum, we are deregulating in areas where previous administrations overstepped and stifled innovation and economic growth. And by deregulating, I don't mean simply rolling back. I also mean replacing, updating, and improving regulations. Case in point, the Clean Power Plan. 27 states challenged the Clean Power Plan because of its overreach. The Supreme Court eventually intervened and issued an historic stay. Our replacement, the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, adheres to the four corners of the Clean Air Act and the Supreme Court cases. And when ACE is fully implemented, we expect to see U.S. power sector CO2 emissions fall by as much as 35% below 2005 levels. ACE will continue our nation's environmental progress, and will do so legally and with the proper respect for the states. Next year, the EPA turns 50 years old. I don't think that there's any question that our nation has made tremendous environmental progress over the past 49 years. In the 1970s, more than 40% of our nation's drinking water systems failed to meet even the most basic health standards. Today, over 92% of community water systems meet all health-based standards all of the time. That's not to say that the other 8% are in failure all the time, but occasionally they may have a day where they exceed one of the limits. At the same time, we also recognize that much more work remains to be done. Before I became the deputy administrator in 2018, I held the record for the longest confirmation process in the history of the agency. I had a lot of time to think about where the agency has fallen short in the past. And if I could summarize it in one concept, it would be a failure to provide greater certainty to the American public. Certainty in our regulations, certainty that we will uphold our responsibilities, and certainty in how we communicate risk to the American public. A lack of certainty from the agency creates confusion among the public and paralysis in the marketplace. So we set out to systematically identify and improve the areas where we need to provide greater certainty. And if there's one program that best reflects our progress, it would be the Superfund program. This is the program charged with cleaning up some of the nation's most contaminated sites. More often than not, the residents living near Superfund sites are low-income or underserved communities. How well or how poorly we do our job directly impacts their health and their well-being. The worst of the Superfund sites are added to a list called the National Priorities List. For much of the agency's history, it hasn't been unusual for a site to sit on the National Priorities List for decades. The Westlake landfill in Missouri, for example, home to radioactive waste from the Manhattan Project, has been on the NPL list for nearly 2 decades without any progress. This past year, we finally announced the action plan to get it cleaned up. We believe that the agency must do better. We believe that a site on the National Priorities List should be just that, a national priority. I'm very pleased to report that in fiscal year 2018, we removed or deleted all or part of 22 sites on the National Priorities List, the most since 2005. And this past year, in fiscal year 2019, we removed all or part of 27 sites from the NPL list, the most since 2001. By removing the sites from the NPL, we are declaring it safe for public health and for redevelopment. These are exceptional and important achievements carried out by the EPA career staff. Their work is breathing new life into these communities. Before I close, I'd like to share a few exciting announcements with you. In case you don't know, I'm also a native of Ohio. And I think, in addition to being your 15th speaker on today's date, I'm also the 15th EPA administrator. I might play the lottery tonight. I'm the only, out of the 15, I believe I am the only EPA administrator that's ever gone swimming in the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes are a national treasure, and we are moving forward with a host of new actions designed to protect and restore these incredible natural resources. Earlier this morning, I announced the release of an updated and aggressive action plan for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, GLRI. The plan outlines the priorities and goals for the GLRI over the next 5 years. It focuses on key issues raised by states, tribes, and other stakeholders. These include cleaning up toxic pollutants, keeping the Asian carp out of the Great Lakes and controlling other existing invasive species, reducing the causes and extent of harmful algal blooms, and protecting and restoring important habitats for fish, birds, and other species, and continuing Great Lakes education and outreach efforts. In conjunction with the action plan, we also announced 5 GLRI grants totaling almost $11 million. This funding will support a variety of projects from habitat restoration to controlling invasive species. Earlier this summer, I took a tour on the Lake Guardian, the largest research vessel in EPA's fleet and the largest research vessel on the Great Lakes. During that tour, we announced the first ever Great Lakes Trash-Free Waters Grant Program, and providing up to $2 million in grants for projects that will remove trash, litter, and debris from the Great Lakes. This new program launches next month with our Great Lakes National Program Office, which will release a request for applications. We expect that the selected projects will be announced in February. Finally, in terms of our larger water infrastructure efforts, we also announced today that we are inviting 38 new projects across 18 states to apply for loans through the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. Together, these loans would total nearly $6 billion to help finance over $12 billion in water infrastructure investments and create up to 190,000 jobs. These loans include a potential $13 million loan to the Downriver Utility Wastewater Authority, which serves 13 Wayne County communities right here in Michigan. Through the WIFIA program, EPA is playing a leading role in President Trump's effort to upgrade our nation's infrastructure and protect the environment and create jobs. It's an exciting time at the agency, and what I've shared with you today only scratches the surface of what we've been able to accomplish under President Trump. I have great plans for EPA's next 5 years, and I have great hope for our next 50. I want to thank you for your time and for your attention, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to share America's environmental progress with you today. And I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Well, there's no shortage of questions. I think we'll have a shortage of time. But thank you very much.
I can read through the answers real fast. Yes, true.
Right.
All the above?
How does EPA evaluate the total emissions related to the manufacture and use of an automobile through the complete life cycle, including the emissions from refining fuel versus mining coal or natural gas to make electricity for a so-called zero-emission vehicle?
How much time do I have? I mean, we take a look at all those factors. We look at not just the CAFE standards, of course, but if you're an automobile manufacturer, you know we take a look at the emissions from the automobile plants. We certainly take a look at the life cycle of the fuels, including ethanol. We take all that into account, but we have a number of different programs there that are impacted across the entire agency. But we look at the manufacturing of the cars, we look at the mining of the raw materials that go into the manufacture of the cars. We look at the CAFE standards, of course, emissions from cars. The automobiles today, as far as the criteria air pollutants, are, I believe it's above 90% cleaner than they were in the 1970s. Our coal-fired power plants are 95 to 98% cleaner than they were in the 1970s. Most people don't realize the progress that we've made, and that's because I believe the media likes to focus on that last 1 or 2% and claim that it's a travesty. But as I said earlier, 74% reduction in the criteria air pollutants since 1970, and that is not. And I want to be very clear. I'm not trying to take credit for that as part of this administration. That's no one administration. It's actually in large part to the dedicated career employees of the agency over the last 49 years.
And related to that, how will the end-of-life lithium-ion batteries be handled?
Personally, I think the biggest challenge that we have on the electricity production side is perfecting battery storage. More so than trying to perfect solar or wind power, it's the battery storage issue. Until we have that figured out, we're not going to be able to use renewable sources for base load generation. And part of that goes to not just the lithium batteries, but the batteries, the batteries for the EVs, for the battery storage. And we're dealing with some rare earth minerals. We're also dealing with hazardous substances. And I think a lot of people forget that. There's a lot of, if you have a solar panel on your house, you need to go back and check your contract to see who's responsible for disposing of the used solar panel once it's reached its end of its life. Because the materials that go into a solar panel are hazardous, and it can't just be sent to, you can't just put it in your garbage. It has to be sent to a hazardous waste facility. So there's a lot of things. I like to say that there is no perfect energy solution. Every energy solution has pros and cons. The only one that I can't think of a con for, if somebody knows, please let me know, would be the geothermal. I'm not aware of a con for geothermal, but there are cons for every single energy source that we use. And as a country, we need to better recognize both the pros and the cons of each of them.
This is probably a question without much of an answer here in the United States, but I'll ask the question anyway.
Okay.
How concerned were you about the recent fires in the Amazon and their environmental impact?
Well, I'm very concerned. I met with the Brazilian environmental minister shortly after the fires about a month ago, and we talked about that, and I offered some technical assistance. We have an app that the EPA staff developed. It's called Smoke Sense, and you can go to the App Store, download it, and it lets you know what the air quality is around fires here in the United States. So that if the fire is in X county, if you live downwind, upwind, what your risk is if you're outside breathing the smoke. And I talked to them about that, but unfortunately we've looked into some technical assistance with them, and they don't have the internet network through the Amazon forest that would be able to plug in the raw data that we do in California and we did in Hawaii on the volcanoes. But we're trying to take a look at what other things that we can do to help Brazil. I was supposed to go to Brazil next week. The Brazilians asked me to postpone the trip until I think February or March, but I'll be talking to the Brazilian minister again when I'm down in Brazil.
This is an interesting question from many perspectives, but what are your
Interesting answer.
Great. What are your thoughts on PG&E rolling blackouts recently in an attempt to limit wildfires?
Well, I'm afraid it was inevitable because of their inability, for whatever reason, and elected officials in California say the company hasn't been doing its job, and the company is saying that they haven't been able to clear away the dead debris along their power lines. And I know that's a problem for a number of electric utilities around the country. They have to keep those lines cleared, and that was what the problem was when debris or dead trees fell on top of lines during high winds, and it caused the fires that ravaged California last year. I don't see that they had a choice but to shut it down because they certainly didn't have the time to clear up all the debris from last year to this year. There's still questions on whether or not the real problem is a lack of financial resources or the state environmental regulations prohibiting them from going on to property to clear out the dead trees.
So this is a short question, and it could be a yes or a no, but you may want to expand on it, and that is, should the government give tax credits and subsidies to the wind power industry?
Ooh. I don't know that I want to weigh into that because that's currently being debated in Congress. It's my role as EPA administrator is not to pick winners and losers between the different energy sources. As a regulatory agency, I believe our role is to set the regulations for no matter what fuel source the country uses or what part of wherever you are in the country, is that we have the regulations in place to make sure that that fuel source is being used in an environmentally conscious manner. I think deciding if there's going to be subsidies, that's something that Congress and then the president, of course, have to weigh in. But at the federal level, that's more Department of Energy or FERC. But in my opinion, the mix of the energy sources should be decided at the state level with the state PUCs, because I think it really does vary from region to region and state to state. But as the EPA administrator, I'm not going to answer that yes or no.
What are some of the most important energy projects for you to push forward during your term?
Well, again, I don't believe that the EPA administrators should be pushing energy projects forward. Again, we set the regulations, but I will say that there's one way that we are weighing in on the national side on this, and that's under the Clean Water Act, Section 401. And this is a provision that allows states to veto projects based on impacts of projects on water quality. And most states use that authority very thoughtfully, but some states have not, in particular California and most recently New York. New York governor has used the Section 401 authority to veto pipelines through New York to deliver natural gas to New York and New England. And he isn't vetoing it for water quality reasons. He's vetoing it because he doesn't like fossil fuels. I think that's a misuse of Section 401, and the president has asked us to step in and set new regulations for the use of the 401 authority by the states. And the reason why this is, in fact, I think the Governor Cuomo's decision to veto the pipeline is probably the worst environmental decision by an elected official in the last year. And let me tell you why. Because it is subjecting New England and New York to further imports of natural gas from overseas instead of using natural gas produced in the Marcellus Shale here in our country that could easily be transported up by pipeline to New England and New York. Last year, in January of 2018, an LNG tanker was in Boston Harbor from Russia. We are purchasing natural gas from Russia to fuel our homes in New England instead of using American natural gas. We produce our natural gas in a much cleaner and environmentally conscious manner than our Russian counterparts do. In the United States, our natural gas production has doubled since 1990, and at the same time, our methane emissions have dropped 15%. I assure you that Russia is not at all concerned about their methane emissions. So if you just look at the natural gas, where it's coming from, our natural gas is cleaner and more environmentally consciously produced. You put on top of that the transportation of natural gas by an ocean liner across the ocean and the carbon footprint of that does not even compare to the carbon footprint of the natural gas here in the United States. That's why I think his decision was the worst environmental decision by an official in the last year, and we're taking a look at how we can set boundaries around the use of Section 401.
We have time for a few more. Would legislation that mandated a significant reduction in plastic use in the U.S. have a meaningful impact on waste plastic in our oceans?
It would have a small impact. 60% of the ocean plastic debris comes from 6 Asian countries. If you take a look at the contribution by country, the United States is number 20. We do have a problem in this country on recycling. Last year on National Recycling Day, which is November 15th, we held the first ever recycling summit at EPA headquarters. We had over 100 people from the entire recycling value chain, from the raw material producers to the manufacturers to the packagers to the waste collection industry to the recycling industry to the end users who take the recycled products and turn it into products for the American public to buy. This year, and we had the first one last year, and I set out 4 challenge questions for everyone to work on over this past year. And we're having our second recycling summit on November 15th this year, and we already have over 200 people. We had to move it to a larger room, and we're actually at capacity. But we have a recycling crisis in our country because we don't have enough places to put the material that we're collecting into. We actually have recycled material just piling up on our docks and harbors around the country and warehouses because China, which was our #1 customer for recycled products, quit accepting recycled material from the US 4 years ago, as well as Europe. So we have a huge problem, but we have to be careful how we solve it. I don't drink coffee, so I'll pick on them. Starbucks last year implemented, and I think they've changed it since, but they did away with plastic straws. They redesigned their lid, and their redesigned lid actually used more plastic than the straw that they replaced. I think they've gone back and changed it again, but we have to be very careful when we set forward on different policy goals like that. You know, my fear is that if we were to ban plastic straws, for example, that most Americans would think that we've solved the plastic problem, and that is not solving the problem, because the problem comes from those 6 Asian countries, and we're working with them. I'm working with the Japanese and the Europeans. We have pilots that we've implemented in Jamaica, Peru, and Panama. And we're taking a look at those pilots to see what's working in those countries, and then we're going to take those pilots to those 6 Asian countries, working through the World Bank and the UN to see if we can solve the problem where most of the plastic, again, 60%, comes from.
So this is an interesting question on your tenure. I would discount the reference to 24 months, but the question is, what are the 3 most important issues facing the EPA in the next 24 months?
In the next 24 months. A few things. First of all, I believe that the #1 environmental problem facing the world today is water. And it's, when you have 1,000 children die every single day worldwide because of a lack of access to drinking water, I think that's a crisis. The marine plastic issue, which I just discussed, and then the water infrastructure issue, huge. We needed to be doing more on water, and we're trying to focus more on that. Did you ask me for 2 or 3?
3.
I'll give you 2, so that way I can do another question. The second is the fact that 40% of the EPA workforce is eligible to retire over the next 5 years. And that will be a huge drain on the agency with the historic knowledge that those people have. Because of that, I hired we had an acting human resource director for years, and I hired a permanent human resources director in March. I actually interviewed the person. I was told that was unusual for an EPA administrator because I was 3 or 4 levels below me. But I said that I'm not going to have a human resources director come on board and be surprised with the questions that I hit her on the first week, and I did. But we have to do a better job of attracting new people into the agency. And I know there's a few millennials. I don't know, are high school students considered millennials? No? Okay, good. Generation Z. So we have a problem with millennials. I know there's a few millennials in the audience. And the problem is, you know, I said we're 40, I think I said this earlier, our agency is 49 years old this year. We still have 10 employees that have been with the agency for 49 years. They're charter employees. It's the history of our agency is people come to work at the agency and they spend 30, 40 years and then they retire. Our managers have a mindset where they hire a new person, they train them, and they think they're going to be there for 20 or 30 years doing the job. But millennials are not looking at the job market like that. They're looking to spend 2, 3, maybe 5 years and then move on to do something else. So we have to, one, do a better job of attracting and retaining people longer than millennials plan to stay. But two, we also have to have a better system so that when people leave the agency, they leave behind this historic knowledge that they have so we don't lose everything that they've learned when they've been with us. And so that's at both ends of the spectrum, when people are leaving the agency and when they first join the agency. And we have a new human resources director. She's doing a great job, but we're going to have a huge problem over the next 5 years because of the retirement rate that we have.
Well, we're almost out of time, but the best part of the questions could be viewed as what we call the lightning round. And so this will be just a short of quick questions with quick answers.
I will try.
Okay. What is something on your bucket list?
Well, actually, I did that 4 years ago. I climbed Kilimanjaro, and that was certainly on my bucket list. And I think that gives me a pass for anything else on my bucket list for a while.
Who is a person other than a family member you would like to have lunch with?
Queen Elizabeth II. She has been briefed by every prime minister since Winston Churchill. I don't think there's anybody in the world today alive who probably has more historical knowledge about what's gone on over the last 70 years.
That's a great answer. It reminds me of Benjamin Franklin's statement that the only thing people have learned from history is people don't learn from history. But I think she has. What is one of your favorite songs?
Crazy by Patsy Cline.
Okay. Your favorite team growing up?
Growing up, I'd have to say the Cincinnati Reds. I'm tempted to say Ohio State Buckeyes, but I have to. I have to say that Cincinnati Reds, the Big Red Machine of the 70s. But right now, this week, it would be the Washington Nationals.
Your best sport?
That I play?
Yes.
What's your next question?
Maybe debating? The last book you read?
Well, I'm currently, I don't have much time to read novels as I did before this job, but I'm currently reading one of my predecessors' autobiographies, Ann Gorsuch, who was the EPA administrator in the 80s. And I found that very interesting. Some of the issues that she dealt with on the agency hasn't changed that much.
One of your favorite movies?
I'm an amateur movie buff. I even took a course in college. So I have one, like, best movie of the 40s or 50s or 60s. I have to say probably the Godfather saga, maybe the Lord of the Rings first trilogy.
Favorite vacation spot?
Scotland.
Describe Detroit in one word.
Cars.
And
my brother-in-law worked for GM for years, so I have a
good
fascination with American cars.
And what would your advice be to your 25-year-old self?
Relax more. That's it. Relax more.
Director Wheeler, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, one quick announcement before we adjourn. If you love today's program, there's 3 more ways to consume it. You can download the audio podcast tomorrow, where you download your favorite podcast on your phone. You can watch the program on Detroit Public TV's website. And if you're an Xfinity customer, you will find it on demand in the Get Local section. Administrator Wheeler, thank you so much for your important work, for your attention to the Great Lakes, and for choosing the Detroit Economic Club. We appreciate that. Jim Anderson, excellent job as presiding officer. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today on time, every time. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.